So, as always, we're doing our discussion we call Attempted Intelligence. This time, I want to walk through some concepts that I'm working on to prepare for my thesis presentation, also that I'm going to use in the discussion of my written thesis. And one of those is the idea of error detection. So I think we've generally talked about this before, and in the discussions that you and I have over time, these things come out, especially when I'm working through things.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that anything that I'm learning, I purposefully engage and I try to talk to almost everybody about the thing that I'm learning?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that's on purpose?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason that I want to bring that part up is, would you predict, now maybe this isn't true for everybody, but would you predict, if you were to do that, if there's something new that you've learned and everybody that you encounter, you do your best to work the new thing into the conversation, would you predict that to be valuable for learning?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is it also valuable for your ability to adjust your understanding of it? Because if you say it to some people, they might have a different angle, and then, like, really? That's interesting. What about this? Like, well, what about that?
Right.
Right. So, I very, very purposefully engage concepts with as many people as I'm able to, in as respectful a way as I can, because I want to see what happens.
Right.
Right? So, I don't just take things at face value. I'm very, very purposeful. I very intentionally try to talk to as many people as I can about the concept. Would you say that when I learn something new, I say, this is the thing? Or do I more so say that this is something new that I've learned? I think it's interesting. I'm not 100% sure if it's correct.
I've never seen you say this is the thing.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
So, and that seems to be a behavior that I had prior to engaging in my master's. So it's not something that my master's taught me.
Yeah.
It's something that a master's program can teach you.
Right.
Yeah, for whatever set of reasons, it seems to be something that was there for me before. Now, do you think that me bringing all these points up is me saying, look at how awesome I am? Or is it just like being expositional?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not to say like, yeah, me.
Well, it's like, okay, we got 20 minutes left. What's going on?
Yeah. No, but the idea being, I happen to think being intentional in most of your actions as often as you can be is useful, because you know what you're trying to do, and whatever comes of it, you have the opportunity to learn from.
You have the opportunity to learn. Yeah.
Which leads, interestingly, into the ability to detect errors.
Okay.
Right? So there's a few terms that I'll throw out, and I'm sure that I'm not perfectly accurate about each one of these terms, but I should be enough on the right track enough that they're useful.
So
right.
Just clarifying, when you're saying the ability to detect errors, are you talking about in yourself, others, or both?
Okay.
Okay.
This is where it's interesting.
All right.
So my research essentially shows that the primary difference an instructor makes, at least in the experiment that I set up, isn't the ability of the individuals to perceive what's going on in a patient active diagnosis.
Okay.
They can perceive it all. How they categorize it, they make mistakes. When provided specific feedback about how they mischaracterized it or miscategorized it, they stop making those mistakes. When you don't give them that feedback, they continue to make mistakes.
Okay.
The primary value of the instructor seems to be, at least in the experiment that I created, the ability to provide feedback about categorization, right? So the external error detection.
Right.
You made a mistake, you didn't know it, here it is, this is how you fix it.
Okay.
Right? So when I'm looking to find information about error detection and error reduction strategies, especially in health science and healthcare, what it usually points to is either the system that the errors are made within, so you didn't get the information fast enough, other people are asking you to do it too fast, the image isn't the accurate angle, you're stressed, you're tired, not really, that's like,
right.
But stress can be because of the speed of the system.
Right.
Those are things. Then there's the individual. Okay, we want you to go through this checklist every time you check a diagnosis and make sure that you're not biased, or we want you to go through this checklist that says, have you thought about your basic science mechanisms? Have you thought about things that you've experienced before? Right? So it's either on the system or on the individual. Right? The system that you're within is probably a little bit easier to change, because they can say, well, we only want you to do 20 images today.
Okay.
Right? So that probably seems like something that can be done,
Right.
but it's really hard because there's only so many individuals that populate the system that if you slow somebody down, then this stuff doesn't happen. So that puts the burden on the patient because the patient can't get through at appropriate speed. But there is information when you start to look at it, and I believe it's more pure psychology, but you could call it more neuroscience, maybe, where if you're doing something where you're measuring brain activity, so there's EEG, so there's like the skull caps that measure electrical activity superficially, and there's very, very consistent features, so you're like, okay, well, there's consistent features, we can see these. So there is something called ERN, or error-related negativity, I believe is what it's called. So you're doing a fairly simple task where you're being asked to identify things, you're being asked to make very simple choices, or you're being asked to key in very simple things like SSSSN or NNNNS, NSSN, whatever it is. What seems to occur is that there is a clear signal that an error is noted very quickly.
Okay.
So you make a mistake on a fairly simple task, a motor task often, or a simple choice task. Very early, there's something that shows that there was an error. So when an error is committed, so you have to time constrain it. So when the person made the error, there's this clear blip.
Okay.
And it is often unconscious. Between 200 and 500 milliseconds after, there's what's called the PE, or their error positivity. You then know you screwed up.
All right.
Right? So errors can be detected, and then there are corrective behaviors. An interesting thing that I seem to have found is that often when you're detecting your own error in a fairly simple task, sometimes there is a blip on the scan that shows what's called lateralized motor readiness.
Okay.
So basically, at the point slightly before or at the exact same point as the ERN, the error-related negativity shows up, there's lateralized motor activity. So you're already beginning to take the brain steps to make the correction.
Oh, okay.
So you don't even consciously know you made a mistake in a simple task, especially a motor task, but you're already starting to correct. And then there's the error positivity, which comes later, and then corrective actions are more obvious with respect to that.
So just clarifying, when you say already making steps to correct, do you mean within your brain, or do you mean within the actual action?
It would be both.
Okay.
So that once that starts to fire, then in pretty short order, the corrective physical actions would occur.
Okay.
Right. So there is some system that's monitoring for errors, and if you know if you likely made an error, you're probably going to see the ERN.
Okay.
If you know you made the error, you're going to see the PE.
All right.
Right. You're definitely going to see, but it's going to be later because it takes time.
Right.
So there is some belief that the ERN is. And I don't know how well this has held up over time because I believe the finding that I saw was around 2002. But the idea that the ERN was more of an output signal.
Oh.
So there's a monitoring system running. It's like, well, that's the output signal, and that's one of the reasons why you can have that quick overlap of the lateralized motor activity, right? Lateralized motor readiness. So there are mechanisms by which you can detect errors. So when an error occurs and you know it, you do something about it.
Right, but the question is, because you mentioned it earlier, and I've been thinking about this whole time, is the category the main thing that allows you to know that you have an error? So
are you talking about in relation to my research?
Generally.
When you use the term category, it probably doesn't apply to most of this research.
Okay, so I know one of the examples you were saying was like NNNS, right?
Yeah.
So I have to know that the category for my error is that anything outside of NNNS is going to be wrong.
To a degree, yes.
Okay.
So the tasks are fairly simple, where they're just like simple presses. So it would be something along those lines. It could be other things, but I haven't as yet seen anything where it would be NNNST.
Okay.
Right. Like I haven't seen that.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't occur. It just means that I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Right. So, but yeah, the idea is that you know you pushed the wrong key.
Right.
You know you made the wrong choice.
Okay.
Right. So you may have some level of awareness that isn't at conscious perception that you made a mistake, and then after it comes to conscious perception. So that's the ERN versus the PE. Right now, so when you've made a mistake and you know it, you do something about it. It seems fairly common, fairly automated. I could make the argument. I think the argument could be made that it's architectural. It's the way that the brain is architected.
Okay.
Right? When there's a difference between target action and output action, you're able to figure it out. Right? It works way easier when they're in very tight times. And the outcome difference is very clear. When you start to look at error reduction strategies in medical settings,
okay,
they go to the system. So, hey, don't ask them to do as much. Make sure that there's checklists. Make sure that there's redundancy, second opinions,
right,
stuff like that. So, system side. Then you're saying, okay, for the individual practitioner, tell them to go through these cognitive debasing strategies. Are you using a recency bias? Are you just thinking really fast? Or are you taking your time? Right, stuff like that.
Right.
Or checklists to recall knowledge. Hey, make sure you think about your basic science mechanisms. And I'm like, well, I did. So when it's geared to the individual, so let's just say you made a mistake on a diagnosis.
okay,
And I asked you to figure out if you made a mistake on the diagnosis. How good are you you think you're going to be at that?
well, I figure I already did the diagnosis and I thought I was right. I was wrong.
Yeah.
So the same capacity in which I used to analyze and figure it out,
Yeah.
it's going to be the same. So it's very small.
Are you saying the likelihood?
The likelihood is very small that
Yeah.
I'm going to detect.
Figure out that
Yeah.
you made an error.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was right.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be difference over time where experts will not necessarily use slow analytic processes. It's quick.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things that I've experienced over time in a healthcare setting is that I've done a lot of steps a lot of times. So I will purposefully remove them when they usually don't give me any information.
Okay.
I'll do it very much on purpose.
Any information at all or any new information?
Useful information.
Okay, useful.
So my diagnostic process in osteopathic manual therapy is motion. I'm moving the patient. So there are certain motions that just don't tell me anything.
Okay.
Right? Or they don't tell me anything often. So there are certain motions that tell me something clear very often.
All right.
So I go to the motions that very clearly tell me something very often, and if they don't tell me anything very often, I use the motions that I've purposely removed.
Wow. Okay.
Right? I'm
That
like,
makes sense.
yeah, because I'm like, well, I didn't find it there, right? And I know what I left out.
Right.
That I don't know that that's common.
Okay.
That's me for whatever set of reasons it's me.
Right.
I don't know that that's common. But the idea being that I've been very purposeful in my choices.
Right.
I'm like, that test is stupid. I'm not going to do it unless nothing else has shown me something.
Right.
It's like, well, what else? What other test do I have? Well, the stupid one.
This is all I got left.
Yeah, let me do the stupid. But I know that I'm fallible. So I'm like, okay, these are the things that usually give me the information I require. High yield, really useful. I'll do that, and then when they don't give it to me, I'll do the other stuff that's more obscure.
Right.
Right. The idea being that I know that I'm going to make mistakes. I've accepted that. Whereas maybe other clinical practitioners don't accept that they're going to make mistakes. They make them and they are aware of them, but maybe there isn't the purposeful acceptance. That's at least possible. But the idea being that asking the person who made the mistake to find the mistake, their process is not necessarily going to allow it. The experts are pretty quick. They've done this stuff thousands of times. They're like, well, no, I don't need to go through that. Because in situations like this, I've gone through it 1,000 times. Then when, theoretically speaking, you encounter the situation where the practitioner's like, well, I did 2 + 2 and the calculator says Jello. I gotta go back. They're probably gonna do it anyways.
Right.
But the errors do occur. Now, errors in emergent medical care are more dangerous.
Right.
Errors in osteopathic manual therapy, not so dangerous,
Right.
right? Like, well, your shoulder doesn't move as well as you want it to, or as well as I want it to, so it's not as dangerous.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's good. You still want to do something about it. But the error reduction strategies are saying, hey, did you think of everything? I'm like, obviously. So I've said this before, but when you're blind to something, how can you be expected to find it? You're blind.
Right.
Right?
So as an individual, though, how are you detecting your errors? Is it through the system that you're using. So your system.
Are you asking me?
Yes, you
Okay,
specifically. Yeah. So how are you detecting your own errors? Because you said you're expecting yourself to make errors.
Yeah.
How are you detecting them if you're expecting to make errors?
So, okay, this is where I've set stuff up because I'm going to make mistakes.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, if everything is normal, the person should move freely in these directions.
Right.
So they should bend left freely, they should bend right freely. So I'm like, okay, if you're normal, you should do that. When I ask you to do that, if it's not free in both directions, well, it's not normal.
Right.
I'm good.
Okay.
So if I do that and I say, when you're sitting up, you bend to the left and you bend to the right, and it's normal, and you tell me that you have back pain, I'm like, okay, that shouldn't be normal if you have back pain, if my paradigm has any value, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And I say, okay, I didn't find it in that test. Can you twist to your left and twist to your right? Because that motion isn't predicated as much on the vertebrae as it is on other things that happen to connect to the vertebrae. So I ask you to do it, and then if I don't see anything there, then it's bend forward, bend backwards. And then I'm like, okay, your back is mechanically sound. It's moving the way it should. Then I would say, okay, is your back hurting because something's going on with your legs? So then I check your legs. But it's a normal process of ruling in and ruling out. Go to the thing that's most likely to be messed up, check it the way that it's most likely to be messed up. If you don't find it there, check it the next most likely way. Check it the most next likely way.
And just keep going.
Right? It's a very strange situation in which a human being would be so symmetrical that they would move freely in all directions.
And have pain?
Forget pain.
Oh, yeah.
It's just very rare that they move symmetrically.
Okay.
As much as it would be nice if medical practitioners effectively solve pain, pain is multifactorial. There are obligate physical sensations, and then there are interpretations that don't seem to be consistent within the individual. So, one day I can do this to you and you're fine with it, and then another day, like somebody's really pissing you off, and I do that, and it's not necessarily that it hurts you, but you don't like it.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a superficial expression of pain.
Right.
So the sensation may not be something that you would then communicate to me as pain, but you're going to show. It's multifactorial.
I know what you're saying,
It's confusing, right? So, but it's very unlikely that in my paradigm that I'm going to find somebody who's symmetrical. It's just not likely, and I'm most likely to find asymmetry in certain motions, with my experience. That said, I know that my experience isn't always perfectly correct because there's people that don't fall within what I've experienced. So that I expect it.
So you essentially, because in this scenario, what I'm imagining is a practitioner, asking for a side bend, left, right, and they're...
You know those terms because I use them around you, but it's basically bend to the left like a little teapot, and bend to the right like a little teapot.
And the patient complains that they have back pain.
Yeah. And
you stop at that point and go, you shouldn't have back pain. You're bending left, you're bending right. So that would be an error.
I would. I'm like, why would you say that in front of me? I would never do that.
But they're not. but they're not detecting that error. So in doing so.
Okay, you're not talking about me. You're talking about like imaginary practitioner.
Yes.
Okay, let me know that before. Otherwise,
sorry, I apologize. I apologize.
You don't really need to. I'm just telling you.
I'll do that in future.
Well, you don't have to. I'll remind you again.
Okay. But the error that you're trying. The error. Almost compensation that you're trying to account for is that you're going through the most common.
So there's this. I think you're going to determine. Sorry for interrupting, but premature closure. You ran the test that you thought you should see. That's actually in the literature. It's like some errors are caused by. You're fine.
Right.
Like I did the test. You're fine. It's like, did you do all the tests? I did the important ones.
Exactly.
It's like, no. Did you do all of them? I did the important ones. What are you saying? I'm not an expert.
Okay.
You are an expert, but we need you to do all the tests. Right. So no, I do the important tests first.
Right.
I will do all the tests when the important tests don't show it.
Right.
So without knowing the term premature closure, when I started to create these things for myself, I somehow stumbled across avoiding premature closure.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. That's. I'm glad I read stuff because now I know the term. Somebody else has thought of it.
Right.
It's like, I know stuff. Other people know other stuff. So they don't know my stuff.
Right.
It's like, okay. Anyways, so yes, the majority of the error reduction strategies that are going to be meaningful are aimed at the individual who made the mistake. Right? I don't know. So, but this is interesting to me because my finding is the value of the person with more knowledge is they can see the mistake that you can't see. They tell you about it and they help you through it. That might be more important for novices than it is for experts.
Okay.
But there is some importance where the groups showed different levels of the mistake, right? The primary difference was if you get the feedback, you stop making it, right? So the 11%, the group that got specific content had about 11% of categorization errors, and then of total possible, whereas the other two groups were closer to 35-40%, right? They would make the same mistake again, right? It wasn't in the exact same spots, but they didn't know the error and they had given the answer before, so they were still trying it. So it's almost like they're trying to figure it out, but they get no feedback, so they can't.
Right.
Now, if you look at professionals are taught, like future professionals are taught by current professionals. If current professionals were taught by previous professionals, there's the possibility that there's an error embedded within the method that they can't detect.
Right.
Not because they're not trying to, but because they haven't been in a position where they purposefully thought from a different angle or they were given a different angle.
Right.
So the problem is you can't just have the outsider say, well, have you thought about this? Because the outsider doesn't have any level of information that would be able to figure out a different angle.
Okay.
You have to have somebody that knows something. So maybe somebody from another specialty. So if we're talking about orthopedic surgeons versus gastroenterologists versus radiologists, like you might have something to say to each other,
right?
Because your subject is the same, the human body.
Right.
Well, have you guys ever thought about looking at it like this? There might be some value there, but for you to tell me about diagnosis, it doesn't mean that there aren't skills that you have, problem-solving skills that you have, but you may not be able to communicate them in a way to me that's going to flip it in my head. You might actually have the answer,
right?
But it's not gonna transfer properly.
Right.
So it's like, oh, how do we do this? So the thing that is of interest to me is at least the possibility that if I can find another way to experimentally show that external error detection is able to reduce error in experts, that might be cool.
So
but
that was my next question.
Well, look how smart I feel.
Well, my next question was essentially going to be if someone doesn't know they're making an error and someone with more knowledge tries to help them see that error,
Sure.
but they resist the knowledge that it is an error. So it's just one of those things where they still have to be open to understand that they make mistakes.
Yeah.
Period.
Yes. I think that under certain circumstances it's easier to do, and other circumstances that can vary, it would be harder to do.
Right.
But I would be more interested if you can see a difference in external error detection for experts, reducing errors over time, because I don't think it would take that much time. Right? But then the next hurdle is, can you get experts in a position where they would accept that? Right? It's like, can it work?
Right.
And then, so first, proof of concept, does it work? If it doesn't work, forget it. If it does work in an experimental setting, then you say, what are the hurdles to injecting this into the system? Right? That's how it would probably have to go, right, to be most appropriate. Any other thoughts, ideas, concepts?
I just wanted to see if I could tie something that you just said back to a previous conversation.
Okay.
What you just said about proving and then seeing if it works, does that go back into the validity and utility talk where everything, so it's like...
I think I need to keep talking. Like, sorry for my face.
No, well, just because you were saying making sure that it works or making sure that the thing that we're talking about is the thing that we're talking about, and then...
So that's validity, yeah. Right. Utility is, will it work?
Will it work?
Do we have enough money? Do we have enough time?
Right.
Reliability is, do we get a consistent range of outcomes? So the key with reliability is, depending on how you're looking at it, is there's a certain type of reliability that's interrated reliability. Do people agree on this?
Oh.
So we want people to look very similar.
Right.
And then there's the reliability of the instrument. The reliability of how we're testing you needs to tell you apart.
Okay.
So the discriminatory aspect is more important. So if it's a test, not everybody shouldn't get the same answer.
Right.
If I'm testing whether or not you can do or know, I need a spread.
Right. Different.
And the average may change, but the spread should stay the same.
Right.
Right? Whereas if I want to know if you're accurate for reliability, if everybody in this field is accurate, I want to see
Like some.
I don't want to be able to tell you apart.
Okay. Yeah, you want to see similar answers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So validity is this testing is this measuring what I say it's measuring? Right? Or is this doing what I say it's doing?
Right.
Reliability is there consistency, but there's different types of consistency. There's consistency of agreement and consistency of being able to tell people who can and can't apart.
Okay.
Right.
So not overly connected. It triggered a.
There's degrees of connection if I'm
Right.
trying to measure it.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. If I'm trying to measure it, I have to have the right experimental setting and measurement to figure it out.
Right.
To figure out if this is doing what I say it's doing. If I want people to be similar, do they look similar?
Right.
Right. So I set that up. Like I want to see you look similar.
That's one. Yeah.
If I want to see you look different, I have to set that up too.
Right.
So those would be in your ontology, your classification system. Does that help?
Yes.
Anything else, good sir?
No, that is it for now.
Fantastic.